The Bronx with hallowed ground asks, and I thought way too much about this scenario, and it's cropped up before, but the Bronx with hallowed ground asks, with the rumors about the Celtics possibly shopping Jaylen Brown, would you do a Brown for Brandon Ingram trade? I feel like the Ingram Zion CJ combo is kind of clunky. They all kind of need the ball a lot. I like the idea of Zion, Brown, CJ. Brown could help bolster the defense next to Zion and CJ, and scaling back his uses from what the Celtics needed would make him a better player. Ingram isn't the defender that Brown is, but I think he offers more self-creation and playmaking. What are your thoughts? So to start with, aside from the deal itself, I agree with everything you said about the difference between these players. Brandon Ingram, if you need to jumpstart a pick and roll, jumpstart an offensive set, rely on someone's maybe in between touch, you want him on your team. He's just a better creator right now. And then Jaylen Brown is, I don't want to say he's a complementary player, but he's not just 3-and-D. He does more than that. I think it's easier to plug him into all these other situations, and he will work on more teams than Brandon Ingram might. What I will say is I don't view Zion, CJ, and Ingram as clunky, because you want to have as many primary playmakers on your team as possible, so long that what they do can spill over to off the ball. And for Zion, CJ, and Brandon Ingram, it does. CJ is a very good shooter off the ball, and I think he showed some on-set chemistry with the Pelicans. Zion coming back changes a lot of that, but Zion, despite not being this high-volume jump shooter, he is devastating off the ball. Get the ball to him in transition, or if he's setting screens and going downhill, or you're just throwing him lobs, he works off the ball. And then Brandon Ingram, yeah, his off-ball touch has improved as well. He's not this high-volume catch and three-point shooter, but he's become a rock-solid one. And so I think he scales to more situations than people will currently credit him for. It might be harder to fit him in, but I think that you want to load up your roster with guys who can make plays on the ball, especially if they can exist off the ball. What's interesting about this is the Pelicans could still probably use Jaylen Brown's defensive juice, and I think Brown gives you more pure rim pressure. Ingram likes to bail on his drives more than Brown does. The trade-off there is that Brown can get tunnel vision, but he was an excellent finisher around the rim, and he will burst through the soul of defenses when he gets going downhill. I also think that you look at his turnover to assist ratio, Brown's, and you also look at some of the passes he throws, some of the turnovers that he actually commits. I understand why some people might be low on him and think that he's never going to make the Tatum-like jump as a playmaker, let alone becoming someone like, like a LeBron. That was never on the table. I almost feel like he's an underrated passer too, and that we've exacerbated the issues with his handle just because we saw it happen in the playoffs. And yeah, that matters, because if it's the extra attention he's getting, or if he's capitalizing predominantly on the attention that Jason Tatum is drawing, that has to change the complexion of how we view his game. But it feels like there's more on-ball creativity there. You saw him like kind of stop and turn and fade and pop around the basket when he gets going, and he can hit those shots. You don't want to slow things down and have him run a pick and roll. And so if you're Boston, I get the appeal of having Brandon Ingram. So these are two very valuable players. What I think is also interesting and deserves to be mentioned, Ingram is about a year younger and has another year left on his deal. So he's more expensive, but where Brown is slated to become a free agent in 2024, he does not have a player option. He just has 2 more guaranteed years left. Brandon Ingram isn't slated for free agency until 2025. It's also because Brandon Ingram's final year salary is $36 million. This will tie into, I think, our last question in the mailbag, by the way, but it's more likely that he will extend off of that number, because 120% raise off of that would be 43 million or whatever it is. And so that's closer to what would be his absolute max at the time, unless the salary cap, there's no smoothing and that thing just fucking jumps. And so you don't have to necessarily risk him getting into free agency, where with Brown, it's fait accompli. Just extending him off that number he's making. Look, so you're talking having that extra year of Ingram and the fact that he got a max. His final year salary that you would extend off of is $36 million. Brown's final year salary, which was sub-max and it's going to expire a year earlier, he would be extending off of 30.7. That's a huge difference when you're looking at someone, again, who hasn't even been given his first max yet. Now you sort of sprinkle in the fact that there have been trade talks surrounding Brown with Kevin Durant. Maybe he becomes a little bit more disenchanted with Boston, or like the question poses, do these players sort of fill needs for either team, where the Celtics get that other creator that they want, while New Orleans shores up its defense and then gets, I think you can call Jaylen Brown a better shooter, not a better off the dribble shooter, but a better shooter, or more reliable floor spacer, however you want to frame it. My gut says because of the defensive value that Jaylen Brown brings, that the Celtics won't view Ingram's extra year of his salary, especially when it's more than Brown's, and maybe just the extra control as enough of an upgrade over Brown. And that's more like you're talking about Brown being involved in a conversation for Kevin Durant, who's one of the greatest shot creators and makers alive of all time. Brandon Ingram is not that. And so while he could be the second engine of your offense, I do still think that if you polled a bunch of executives, they would still prefer Brown because of the defense, because there's a little bit more plug and playness on offense, and they're going to appreciate Brown's rim pressure and maybe even overlook some of the passing issues he has. And I know people have said the words that are coming out as his offensive game is mechanical, robotic, however you want to, rigid. And there is a certain rigidity to the way that he plays, but there's also more malleability too. And so you might take that, we're talking about, by the way, Jaylen Brown is not like he's 80. He just wrapped up his age 25 season. So he can still get better. And so that's what my gut says. When I personally do this trade, I don't know if I would necessarily do it for either side, because I think the Pelicans' best path to being uber successful is to stack the deck with on-ball creators who don't overlap too much with each other. We don't know what's going on with Zion's health. CJ McCollum isn't exactly super young at this point. And Ingram, earlier in his career, had some injury issues. We saw CJ deal towards the tail end of his time in Portland with some injury issues as well. You just want to hedge against those bets. And so you don't need the secondary or even like a second primary shot creator, let's call it, as much as Boston does right now, since it's still, is it Brown? Is it Brogdon? Is it Marcus Smart? They're still asking that question. So there's Tatum, and then there's still sort of a fuzziness on the number 2 pecking order. But if you're New Orleans, still trying to pronounce it not the way that people hate it, by the way. So hopefully everyone appreciates the effort to try to remember. If you're New Orleans, I still think you need Ingram, and that you'd rather take the ceiling on his on-ball creativity than have to acquire Brown, where even if it's just straight up, and they're I do believe that the money, like in their current salaries, would work straight up. We're talking about 28-7 versus 31. Yeah, so you can just trade them straight up. There's a chance that Boston would demand something else, and also just now you risk Brown getting to free agency 1 year sooner, and could he leave? And like I said, the Zion element matters a lot to me, where maybe Brown is just the better catch and shoot guy if you want Zion really operating on ball a ton. But you also want Zion to be your screener at points, or to just get rolling towards the basket, even if it's from a standstill without a screen. Ingram's going to do a better job of finding him there. And if there was a real fit issue between New Orleans or CJ McCollum and Ingram and Zion, if I was actually concerned about what that looked like, maybe I would consider this. Also, I think the Pelicans, they showed a lot of defensive improvement after their 3-16 start, whatever it was, under Willie Green. Especially, he got them to get back in transition. Some of their rotations were just more on point, where they were less like these wandering children lost in a supermarket, or however you want to frame it, looking in the half court. And now with Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, even Dyson Daniels coming in, it feels like they might be able to, and Larry Nance Jr. too, let's not forget about him. It feels like they might be able to upgrade their defense this season, especially if Zion improves there in any way whatsoever. So I don't think I would do this for either side, but it is a fascinating discussion if you flip-flop these two players, which team gets better, or do they both somehow get worse? And I honestly don't know the answer to that question, because you are giving up, there's a defensive downgrade just as much as there might be a shot creation downgrade. Going from Ingram to Jaylen Brown for New Orleans, there's that shot creation downgrade, but there's that defensive downgrade still, as much as Ingram has improved for Boston if they went from Brown to Ingram. And I also, finally, we haven't even heard that the Pelicans would be willing to give up Brandon Ingram in a Kevin Durant trade. If push comes to shove and KD said, I want to go to New Orleans, and that was that, I do think that the Pelicans would try to construct a deal without Ingram. And I think that they could do that when you look at all the picks they have in addition to the youngsters. I do think they would if KD said, I want to be in New Orleans. But that being said, we haven't even heard that he's not been deemed the level of untouchable as Scotty Barnes, mostly because the Pelicans have existed on the fringes of the Kevin Durant discussions. We don't even know how involved they are. It's just us, these talking heads, discussing it, really. And there's been some chatter like behind the scenes. You'll hear it from people. So yes, you know that there's a tangential involvement, but it's not front and center. And then also, the Celtics, are you trading Jaylen Brown if you're not getting Kevin Durant? Is he eminently available? And if look, that might be another podcast. Like, what could you get in a Jaylen Brown trade that's independent of KD? And are there any worthwhile deals? I think this would be worth at least thinking about for both sides. I have a feeling Pelicans fans would immediately say that it's not. That's just my guess. That's not an insult. Maybe it's not. I also have a feeling a bunch of Celtics fans would say, hey, no way. It's an interesting thought exercise. I ultimately wouldn't do it for either side. What do you think, though? Let me know. Let me know in the comments about this question, which I clearly thought and talked way too long about.